During dinner, I contradicted my mother-in-law, and my husband slapped me. I packed my things and left. The moment I walked out the door, I made a move that sent his entire family into a panic. The stunning blow from the man I shared a bed with, delivered in the middle of a family dinner, didn't just break 2 of my ribs, it completely shattered 3 years of silent suffering as a daughter-in-law. Clutching my searing chest and the bleeding corner of my mouth, I refused to shed a single tear of weakness. I calmly packed the 5 most important items I owned, smiled bitterly, and proudly pulled my suitcase out of that cursed apartment. Just 15 minutes later, the wail of police sirens tore through the night, echoing across the courtyard of the condo building. That was the moment my sharp, legal retribution officially began, kicking off a chain of pure panic for my husband's family and forcing the man who hurt me to pay the steepest price imaginable. It was a frigid, late winter evening in Chicago, the wind howling and rattling the windows of our 15th floor condo. Inside, the silence was so heavy I could hear the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. Dinner was served, still hot, but my heart had long gone cold. 3 years as a daughter-in-law in this family had accustomed me to meals that were hard to swallow. My mother-in-law, Brenda, sat at the head of the table. She picked up the choicest piece of roast chicken, dripping with gravy, and placed it in my husband Michael's bowl. She smiled lovingly, urging her son to eat up and keep his strength for work. Then, she turned to me. Her expression instantly shifted, her eyes becoming cold and critical. She slammed her fork down and cleared her throat to launch into her familiar tirade. It was the same topic that had haunted me for 1,000 days. She clicked her tongue, shaming me for being married for 3 years with a barren womb. She complained that other families welcome a daughter-in-law and immediately have grandchildren to cradle. Her family, she lamented to my father-in-law, Richard, had been cursed with a defective model. She whined that relatives back in their small town were always asking, and she was too embarrassed to answer. I kept my head down, forcing a mouthful of plain mashed potatoes into my mouth. A lump formed in my throat. For years, I had taken countless medications, from herbal remedies to prescription hormones, and visited specialist after specialist. The doctor's verdict was clear. Both Michael and I were perfectly healthy. It was simply a matter of time. Michael knew this, but he always chose silence whenever his mother attacked me. He was a coward who worshipped his mother. In his eyes, filial duty was more important than his wife's pain. Tonight, however, Brenda's words were sharper than usual. She dragged my own parents, who lived in a small town in rural Illinois, into her insults. She said they didn't know how to raise a daughter, producing someone who couldn't even conceive and had the nerve to talk back. My patience finally reached its limit. This condo was purchased with my own savings before we were married. The monthly bills were all paid from my salary. Yet, I was forced to live like a criminal in my own home. I set my fork and knife down, lifted my chin, and looked my mother-in-law directly in the eye. I spoke each word clearly and deliberately. Mother, whether or not we have a child is a private matter for my husband and me. Please don't interfere. My words were like a match thrown on dry hay. Brenda's eyes bulged. She slammed her hands on the table, shrieking that I was a disrespectful shrew who dared to talk back to her. Richard, sitting beside her, just frowned and shook his head, muttering about my lack of manners. In that instant, Michael shot up from his chair. It all happened so fast I couldn't react. He lunged at me and swung his hand, delivering a brutal slap across my face. The force of an enraged man sent me stumbling backward. I lost my balance, tripped, and fell hard. My left side crashed violently against the sharp corner of the solid oak coffee table in the living room. A dry crack echoed in the room. A blinding pain shot from my ribs straight to the top of my head, and my vision went black for a second. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, clutching my side, each breath a ragged, difficult gasp. The metallic taste of blood from my split lip mixed with the salt of tears I refused to let fall. The family dinner had officially become a war zone, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this marriage was over. The cold of the floor seeped into my skin, but it was nothing compared to the ice encasing my heart. I lay there, curled in a ball, as the agony of broken ribs pulsed through me. The sound of shattered dishes mixed with Michael's heavy, angry breathing. My mother-in-law jumped to her feet. For a moment, she looked startled to see me crumpled in pain, but her usual venom quickly returned. She pointed a finger at me, loudly defending her son's savage act. "You're a daughter-in-law who disrespects her elders. You deserve to be taught a lesson by your husband," she screamed, even threatening me not to play the victim in her house. Michael stood over me, his eyes bloodshot. There wasn't a flicker of remorse on his face. Instead of helping me up, he pointed at the floor and ordered me to kneel and apologize to his mother immediately. He said that to protect his mother's honor, he was prepared to throw me out on the street. I didn't cry. The tears of weakness had all dried up during countless lonely nights before. Instead of screaming or pleading, a faint, bitter smile touched my lips. It was a smile of pure agony, but also of complete clarity. This slap, this fall, had awakened every one of my senses. It had shattered the fragile illusion of peace I had desperately tried to maintain for 3 years. I looked closely at the face of the man who had once promised me the world. All I saw now was a weak, cruel coward. I finally saw this marriage for what it was. I couldn't sacrifice another second of my youth for these cold-blooded people. Suppressing the bone-deep pain that flared with every breath, I gripped the arm of a chair and slowly pulled myself to my feet. My legs were unsteady, but my back was perfectly straight. Without a single glance at the mother and son, I turned and walked, slowly but resolutely, into our bedroom. I slammed the door and locked it, leaving them stunned in the living room. Time was of the essence. I grabbed the small carry-on suitcase from the top of the closet. The pain in my side flared, making me break out in a cold sweat, but my mind was sharper than ever. I opened my desk drawer and gathered the 5 things that would define the rest of my life. First was the deed to the condo, in my name alone, proving my premarital ownership. Second were my driver's license, social security card, and other important personal documents. Third was a silver USB drive containing all the images and video clips from the living room security camera, footage that captured Michael's previous tantrums, smashing things, shoving me, and pushing me down. It was a weapon I had quietly prepared long ago, waiting for the day I would need it. Fourth was my bank card and some emergency cash. Fifth were a few simple outfits, enough for the next few days. I zipped the suitcase, put on my thick wool coat, and unlocked the door. When I stepped out, my mother-in-law was standing there with her arms crossed. She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "If you're so tough, then get out. And once you walk out that door, don't you ever come crawling back." Michael sat on the sofa, looking away, his posture radiating cold indifference. I gave them one last, sweeping glance. My father-in-law had remained silent through it all, not saying a single word to intervene. So this was their idea of a respectable, well-bred family. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and walked out, letting the door slam shut on a dark past I was determined to extinguish forever. The wind in the building's hallway hit my face like a slap of ice. I pulled my collar up, biting my lip to stifle the pain that was now spreading from my left side throughout my entire body. Every step, every deep breath, felt like 1,000 needles stabbing my chest. Still, my legs carried me forward steadily. The wheels of the suitcase echoed on the marble floor, a sound as cold and brittle as the marital bond that had just been irrevocably broken. I stepped into the elevator, leaning my back against the cold, stainless steel mirror. My reflection showed a woman with a swollen, red cheek marked by a handprint, the blood on her lip now dried. I looked ravaged, but my eyes burned with determination. Down in the deserted lobby, I found a corner sheltered from the wind and shakily took out my phone. My hands were freezing as I dialed my lawyer, David. He was a brilliant attorney and an old friend from college whom I had discreetly contacted 6 months prior after a previous incident with Michael. Back then, I was still hoping to fix things and had only asked for advice as a precaution. Tonight, I needed him to act. He answered immediately, his voice calm and professional. I tried to breathe shallowly so my voice wouldn't tremble from the pain. I told him briefly that Michael had just assaulted me, breaking my ribs, and that I had left the apartment. I asked him to activate the emergency plan we had discussed. The first thing, I instructed, is to call the Chicago Police Precinct directly. I want to report Michael for aggravated battery. I have all the evidence from the internal camera, which I can access remotely from my phone. The second thing is critical, I continued. I need you to draft a notice to the bank first thing tomorrow morning to immediately freeze our joint savings account. There's over $12,000 in it. That is entirely my money, saved from my salary over the years. Michael didn't contribute a single dollar, but his name is on the account. I can't let him and his mother drain my hard-earned savings. And the last thing, I said, is to prepare an emergency petition for an order of protection. I know how abusers operate. When they see their prey escaping, they become desperate and may try to retaliate or harass me. I need the law to protect my physical safety in the coming days. David listened carefully to every detail. He expressed his outrage at what my in-laws had done but maintained the composed demeanor of a legal professional. He advised me to take a taxi to the nearest major hospital immediately for emergency treatment and to get an official medical report of my injuries. He assured me he would handle all the remaining legal procedures that very night. After hanging up, I looked up at the 15th floor. The yellow light from my apartment window was still shining. Up there, they were probably celebrating their victory, thinking they had successfully thrown the stubborn daughter-in-law out. They had no idea that Michael's slap had just triggered the most powerful counteroffensive I could ever launch. I was no longer a victim they could trample at will. About 15 minutes after the taxi drove me away from the condo building, my phone began vibrating incessantly. It was a text from Mrs. Gable, the kind woman who lived across the hall and served on the condo board. She had occasionally visited and had an inkling of the pressure I was under from my mother-in-law. Through her flood of messages and the short video clips she sent, I could vividly picture the scene unfolding back at my apartment. Everything was going exactly as planned. According to Mrs. Gable, shortly after I left, a Chicago Police Department squad car, with its lights flashing and siren blaring, pulled into the courtyard. The noise shattered the night's tranquility, causing residents to peek out their windows. 2 uniformed officers and the building's security guard went straight up to the 15th floor. They knocked on my door with a sense of urgency. My mother-in-law opened it, her initial attitude arrogant and dismissive, asking what the officers wanted. But when they informed her they were responding to a domestic battery complaint and needed to take Michael down to the precinct for questioning, Brenda's face went from flushed red to ghostly white. She stammered, denying everything, and trying to protect her son, claiming it was just a minor marital spat. However, the officers were firm. They asked for Michael's ID and told him he had to come with them. It was only then that Michael truly began to panic. He emerged trembling from the bedroom, the aggressive man who had struck me now completely gone. In full view of the curious neighbors who had gathered in the hallway, the police handcuffed Michael for safety and led him to the elevator. Seeing her precious son being led away in handcuffs like a common criminal, Brenda completely lost control. The dignified, respectable image she had so carefully cultivated vanished in an instant. She threw herself into the hallway, collapsing onto the floor, wailing and thrashing about. She went from door to door, crying to the neighbors, screaming that I was a venomous snake who had framed her son. But she was met only with cold stares and the sound of doors closing. Everyone in the building was all too familiar with Brenda's abrasive nature and how she treated me. The sudden and humiliating turn of events was too much for my father-in-law, Richard. With a history of heart problems and high blood pressure, he clutched his chest and collapsed in the living room. Thanks to Mrs. Gable and a few other neighbors calling 911, an ambulance was dispatched, and Richard was rushed to the hospital. Sitting in the back of the taxi, headed toward the hospital myself, I read the messages with no trace of pity. In less than an hour after that fateful slap, the family that so prided itself on tradition, honor, and appearances had completely imploded. Their current chaos was the price they had to pay for years of enabling evil, for their heartless disregard for another human being's dignity. I asked the driver to pull up to the emergency entrance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The ER at night was always a chaotic scene, thick with the smell of antiseptic and the constant sound of ambulance sirens. I pulled my suitcase into a corner, holding onto the wall to stay steady. The pain in my side was intensifying. Even a slight cough felt like a knife twisting in my chest. A triage nurse noticed my pale face and the dried blood on my lip and approached me. I explained that I had fallen and hit my side on a hard object and was having trouble breathing. She quickly brought over a wheelchair and helped me into it, wheeling me directly into an exam room. The attending physician was an older man with calm, serious eyes. He gently lifted my sweater to examine the area. The moment his fingers touched the bruised, swollen skin on my left side, I couldn't help but wince and groan. He immediately ordered X-rays and an abdominal ultrasound to check for internal injuries. Waiting for the results, I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I watched other patients being comforted by worried family members and then looked down at my own cold hands, but I quickly pushed the self-pity away. Crying wouldn't solve anything. I needed to be strong for the difficult legal battle ahead. Half an hour later, the doctor called me back into his office. He pointed to the X-ray film illuminated on the light box. The official diagnosis was delivered. I had clean breaks on my 6th and 7th ribs on the left side. The surrounding muscle tissue was severely bruised from a powerful external impact. Fortunately, the broken bones hadn't punctured my lung, but I would need to have my chest wrapped, take strong pain medication, and avoid any strenuous activity for at least a month. The doctor sat down, ready to write in my chart. He looked up at me with understanding eyes and gently asked about the cause of the injury. Was it a car accident? A fall down the stairs? I sat up straight, took a deep breath, and pushed aside the shame that so many victims of violence feel. In a cold, firm voice, I told him, "Please write down that the cause of injury was assault." I was beaten and pushed into a wooden table by my husband. The doctor paused for a beat, then nodded with empathy. He carefully wrote in clear, legible script in my medical file. Every stroke of his pen felt invaluable to me. This medical report, stamped by a major city hospital and explicitly stating domestic abuse as the cause, would be my ironclad proof. It was the unshakable legal foundation I needed for the forensic examination. Michael thought he could do whatever he wanted behind closed doors. He was wrong. I was going to drag his crimes into the light and make him pay for every ounce of physical and emotional pain he had caused me. After getting my ribs wrapped and picking up my prescriptions, I walked out of the exam room. The hospital was still busy, even late at night. As I passed the waiting area for the cardiac unit, I froze. Through the glass window, I saw a familiar scene. My father-in-law, Richard, was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm, his face pale and his eyes closed. Slumped in a chair beside him was my mother-in-law, Brenda. Her hair was a mess, her coat was disheveled, and she had lost all of the smug superiority she'd had at the dinner table just hours before. Brenda looked up, and her eyes met mine. They instantly turned bloodshot with rage. She shot up, burst out of the room, and lunged toward me like a predator. She raised her hand to slap me, just as her son had done. She hissed curses, calling me a jinx, a wicked daughter-in-law who wanted to drive her family to ruin. But I was no longer the submissive woman who would stand still and take it. I took a step back, my gaze as sharp as a dagger. The sheer coldness in my eyes made her hand freeze in midair. I spoke, my voice low and cutting. "I just wanted to let you know," I said, "that my lawyer has already filed an emergency motion to freeze the joint bank account. All withdrawals from that $12,000 savings account are now blocked. That is my money, earned with my sweat and tears. You and your son won't touch a single cent." Brenda's face drained of all color. Her mouth fell open, and her hands trembled as she grabbed the doorframe for support. I wasn't finished. I delivered another blow. "You and Richard need to pack your things and be out of the condo by the end of this week. That property is in my name, purchased before the marriage. It is legally protected as my separate asset. I will not allow my abusers to live comfortably in a home that I paid for. Finally, I reminded her of the nearly $4,000 she had borrowed from me over the past 2 years, claiming it was for family matters back home, money she never paid back. I have saved every text message and every bank transfer record as proof, I said coldly. If you try any more of your stunts or attempt to slander me, I will sue you for fraud. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving my mother-in-law frozen in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Just as I reached the hospital exit, my phone buzzed. It was David, my lawyer. The night was pitch black, and the wind was still howling. I found a bench under an awning, sat down carefully to avoid jarring my ribs, and answered the call. David's voice was grave. He had shocking news. Michael is being held at the precinct for questioning, he said. But his family is pulling strings, trying to get him released on bail. And the most despicable part? He's telling the police that you're pregnant and need him at home to take care of you, trying to gain sympathy from the investigators. The word pregnant made my ears ring. An icy chill shot down my spine. My hand holding the phone started to tremble. Memories from a few days ago flooded back. I had been feeling off, nauseous, and my period was late. I had taken a pregnancy test early one morning. 2 faint lines appeared. After 3 years of longing for a child, my heart had pounded with joy. I carefully wrapped the test in a tissue and buried it deep in the bathroom trash, planning to see a doctor for confirmation before sharing the news with Michael. But Brenda, with her snooping, invasive nature, must have gone through the trash and found it. I had thought that maybe, if she knew, her attitude toward me would soften. I was so wrong. The truth, revealed by David, was a new level of cruel. My mother-in-law had secretly told Michael the news already, which meant that tonight, at dinner, when Michael lunged at me, slapped me, and sent me crashing into the table, he knew. He knew I was carrying his child. He knew I was pregnant, and he still struck me with such violence. He valued his cruel mother's petty ego more than the life of his unborn child and the safety of his wife. The reality was too much to bear. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I clutched my stomach as hot tears finally streamed down my swollen cheeks. I wasn't crying for my dead marriage. I was crying for the tiny, innocent life inside me. It had chosen the wrong family. It could not be born into a world where its own father would beat its pregnant mother. It could not be raised under the influence of such a toxic, hateful grandmother. I wiped my tears, clenched my jaw, and suppressed the soul-crushing pain. There, in the dead of night, I made a heartbreaking but resolute decision. I would terminate the pregnancy. I would rather bear the sin alone than let my child be born into the same tragic fate as me. The next morning, the Chicago sky was a dreary gray, with a cold drizzle falling. Despite a sleepless night tormented by the pain from my broken ribs, I took a taxi from the hotel to the police precinct where Michael was being held. David was already waiting for me at the entrance. He took my small suitcase, his eyes filled with sympathy as he saw my haggard face and the medical wrapping around my waist. We met with the detective in charge of the case. He offered me a seat and a cup of hot water. His eyes scanned the hospital report, the x-rays, and the official documentation of my injuries. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and respect for my calm, articulate demeanor. I opened my suitcase and took out the silver USB drive. "Detective, if you could please check this," I said. The video from the previous night played on his computer screen. The image and sound were crystal clear, capturing Brenda's verbal abuse, my restrained response, and the horrifying moment Michael exploded, slapping me so hard I flew into the table. The sickening thud of the impact silenced the room. The USB also contained dozens of other recordings from the past year of Michael smashing furniture, of his screaming tirades. I provided a detailed account of each incident. I made it clear that Michael's abuse was a systematic, repeated pattern of behavior that had been escalating in severity. The detective typed his report, nodding with understanding. He commended me for my thorough evidence collection. The proof was undeniable. Michael's actions, combined with the medical report, went far beyond a simple domestic dispute. It was felony assault. The case was officially opened. The doors of a jail cell were slowly creaking open for him. After I gave my statement, the detective informed me that Michael was desperately requesting to see me for 5 minutes. David advised against it, but I shook my head. I needed to do this myself. I wanted to personally sever any last thread of hope this pathetic man might be clinging to. I entered the small interview room. Michael was sitting on a wooden chair, his hands clenched together. He looked nothing like the well-dressed professional he was every day. He was a mess, disheveled, unshaven, his eyes wild with panic. The moment he saw me, he shot up and then fell to his knees on the cold floor, sobbing into his hands. He launched into a predictable performance of regret. He blamed work stress, blamed alcohol, blamed a moment of uncontrolled anger. He swore he would change, that they would move out, that he would give me his entire salary. He begged me, for the sake of our 3 years of marriage, to drop the charges and save him from prison and losing his job. I stood with my arms crossed, watching his pathetic act with the detached gaze one might give a stranger. I cut through his lies. "Did you know I was pregnant?" I asked him directly. "Did your mother tell you?" Michael froze. His sobs caught in his throat. His eyes darted away, unable to meet my sharp gaze. His silence was the only answer I needed. I took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. "I'm scheduling the procedure for tomorrow," I announced, my voice devoid of emotion. "I'm terminating the pregnancy. This child will never be born." Hearing this, Michael's fake remorse vanished. His eyes bulged, and the veins in his neck popped. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his true nature re-emerging. "You're a monster," he spat. "A cold-blooded murderer? Killing your own child just to get back at me?" I took a step closer, bringing my bruised face right up to his. "Your slap killed this baby, Michael," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "A man who knowingly and brutally beats his pregnant wife forfeits the right to ever be called a father." I turned and walked out the door, not looking back at the broken man screaming in despair behind me. Leaving the precinct, David drove me to a high-end residential building on the other side of the river, far from my old neighborhood. He had used his connections to rent a secure serviced apartment for me for a month. With multiple layers of keycard access and 24/7 security, it was a safe haven where Michael's family couldn't reach me. Inside the new apartment, decorated in warm, clean tones, I locked the door and sank onto the soft sofa. Alone in the silence, the strength I had maintained for the past 24 hours crumbled. The pain in my ribs flared up, and I gasped for breath. I made some tea, took my prescribed painkillers, and stood before the bathroom mirror, dabbing ointment on my bruised face. Looking at my battered reflection, I didn't shed another tear. The first night in my new sanctuary, my body ached, but my soul felt a strange, profound sense of relief. The suffocating atmosphere, the endless criticism, the prying eyes, they were all behind me now. Later that afternoon, my boss called. The news of my family drama had likely spread through the office grapevine. Her voice was warm and kind. She didn't pry but got straight to the point. She told me to take all the time I needed, that the company would approve an extended leave, combining my vacation days and sick leave. She also said that if I needed financial assistance for medical bills or better legal representation, the company and its HR department were ready to support me. The kindness I found at my workplace, a place where I was valued for my skills, felt more genuine than the counterfeit family ties I had just severed. Her encouragement was a powerful boost, strengthening my resolve for the fight ahead. The second night in the safe house passed in an eerie silence. Outside, a cold rain misted the windows. I reached for my phone. It was 9 p.m. It was time to face the people who truly loved me. I opened a video call app and dialed my parents in their small Illinois town. My mother's kind, weathered face appeared on the screen, a smile instantly lighting up her features. But the smile vanished as the phone's light illuminated my swollen, bruised cheek and split lip. My father, a retired Army veteran, rushed over from his chair. His sharp eyes widened in shock. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming with protective rage. "Who did this to my daughter?" My mother was already wiping away tears, frantically asking where I was, if I was in pain, what had happened. Seeing their distress, the wall I had built around myself finally collapsed. For the first time since Michael had struck me, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. I cried, the tears stinging the cuts on my face as I recounted the entire story. Brenda's insults, Michael's violent attack, the broken ribs, and the police report. When I finished, my father's face was beet red. He declared he was renting a car tonight and driving up to Chicago with some of our relatives. He was going to their house to settle the score and demand justice for his daughter. "We may not be rich," he roared, "but no one gets to treat my child like an animal." His anger was understandable, but I quickly calmed him down. I wiped my tears and explained that I had everything under control. I had the best lawyer, solid medical evidence, and video proof of the assault. The law would handle Michael. If he went and started a fight, our family would be the ones to suffer the legal consequences. My mother tearfully convinced him to listen. She told me to eat well and rest, offering to come stay with me. I smiled sadly and declined. I didn't want her to see me in this state, or to be exposed to the mess that was sure to come from Michael's family. I asked them to trust me, to support me from afar, with the unconditional love of my family as my bedrock. A warmth spread through my cold heart, giving me the strength to continue the fight. The next morning, I was getting ready to go with David to the forensic medical examiner's office when I received a call from an unknown number. A smooth, middle-aged male voice introduced himself as Mr. Davis, the attorney representing Michael's family. His tone was slick and condescending. He started with flowery expressions of sympathy for my injuries, saying that marital disagreements are normal, and Michael had simply lost his temper for a moment. Then came the offer. He said Richard and Brenda were prepared to cover all my medical expenses and give me an additional $4,000 in cash for emotional distress. In return, all I had to do was sign a document dropping the criminal charges so Michael could walk free. I listened to his deceptive words, a wave of nausea washing over me. Did they think $4,000 could buy my dignity, my health, and my self-respect? Did they think a broken rib and 3 years of abuse could be erased with pocket change? I told Mr. Davis, in no uncertain terms, that the justice system was not a marketplace where his clients could bargain. I refused any and all offers of settlement. My only goal was to see this through in a criminal court and ensure that Michael received a sentence that fit his crime. I warned him not to bother calling me again and to direct all future communication to my lawyer, David. After hanging up, I met David downstairs. We drove to the county medical examiner's office to formalize the injury assessment. The process was thorough and professional. The examiners reviewed my hospital records, measured the bruises, and analyzed the x-rays. The final report confirmed everything. The percentage of bodily harm I sustained was significant, well over the threshold required to prosecute for a felony. This forensic conclusion was the final nail in the coffin, crushing any attempt by Michael's family to buy or manipulate their way out of this. Later in the week, I decided to stop by my office to hand over some files before my official leave began. I wore a loose turtleneck to hide the rib brace and a face mask to cover the lingering bruises. I had just settled at my desk when the receptionist called from the lobby. She sounded panicked. An older woman claiming to be my mother-in-law and a man in a suit were causing a scene, demanding to be led up to my department. I knew it was Brenda and the sleazy lawyer. I calmly told the receptionist to have security keep them in the lobby and that I would be right down. When the elevator doors opened, I was met with a ridiculous spectacle. Brenda was slumped on a lobby sofa, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and wailing loudly for all the employees and visitors to see. She was playing the part of a heartbroken mother-in-law being victimized by a cruel daughter-in-law. She screeched that I was an ungrateful, money-grubbing liar who had framed her son, claiming I had intentionally thrown myself against the table to get him arrested and steal the family's assets. Even more viciously, she accused me of callously getting an abortion simply to hurt them. People were starting to whisper, looking at me with suspicion. The old me would have been mortified, but the new me walked calmly toward her. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out two documents, the official police report and the forensic medical examiner's report, both stamped in red. I held them up for Brenda and her lawyer to see. In a clear, strong voice that carried across the lobby, I announced, "This is the official certification of injuries caused by the violent assault committed by your son. And your actions right now, coming to my workplace to spread lies and slander my name, constitute defamation and public harassment. I am asking building security to save the surveillance footage of this little performance. I will be filing another police report against you." At the mention of another police report, Brenda's fake tears stopped instantly. Her face went pale. The lawyer, Mr. Davis, realizing their stunt had backfired spectacularly, quickly grabbed her arm and hustled her out the door. I thanked the security guards and calmly walked back to the elevator, leaving behind a lobby full of stunned but now impressed colleagues. On Thursday morning, I went to the women's hospital. This was the day I had to make the most painful decision of my life. The hallways were filled with happy, expectant couples. The sight was a stark contrast to my own lonely, battered state. I explained my situation to the doctor, showing her the proof of the severe domestic violence I was a victim of. I explained that I could not bring a child into such a dangerous and toxic environment. The hospital required a session with a psychological counselor. After an hour of talking, the therapist, a kind woman in her 60s, fully supported my decision. She held my hand and affirmed that in situations of life-threatening abuse, protecting the mother's safety and well-being is the absolute priority. Her validation eased some of the guilt gnawing at me. I returned to the doctor's office and, with a trembling hand, signed the consent form. I closed my eyes and silently said goodbye to the little life I had so desperately wanted for 3 years. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better father," I thought. "I'm setting you free so you don't have to live a life of darkness like I did." The sharp, clean signature closed the most painful chapter of my life, but it also cleared the way for a new beginning. After the procedure, I left the hospital feeling physically and emotionally drained. I stopped at a small cafe to get a hot ginger tea before heading back to my apartment. As I sat waiting, the tapping of a cane caught my attention. It was my father-in-law, Richard. He looked 10 years older. His hair was now completely white, and he walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He had somehow tracked me down. He sat across from me, his usual air of authority gone, replaced by a desperate humility. He tearfully apologized for his wife and son, begging me for forgiveness. Then he got to the real reason he was there. He clasped his wrinkled hands together and pleaded with me to keep the baby. He said it was the family's last hope. He promised that if I gave birth to the child and dropped the charges against Michael, he would force Brenda to apologize, and would even sign over the deed to their house in his hometown to me. I took a sip of the hot tea and looked at him, my expression unreadable. "You're too late," I said, my voice flat and empty of emotion. "The procedure was done this morning. There is no baby." The color drained from his face. His cane clattered to the floor. His mouth hung open as he stared at me in horror. I didn't offer any comfort. Instead, I laid bare his own complicity. I reminded him of all the dinners where he sat in silence, while his wife verbally abused me. I reminded him of all the times he said nothing as his son flew into rages. "Your silence enabled them," I said. "Your obsession with family honor over human decency is what led us here. My decision today is the direct consequence of the seeds you all planted." Richard broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. But his regret was meaningless now. It could not change a single thing. A week later, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Michael's family launched their final, desperate attack. My cousin sent me a link to a viral post in a massive Chicago community Facebook group. The post, written by Michael's cousin, was a complete fabrication, painting me as a manipulative villain. It claimed I had faked my injuries to frame her kind, gentle cousin, all to steal his money. The post viciously accused me of aborting my own child out of pure spite. The story spread like wildfire. The court of public opinion, easily swayed, turned on me. I was flooded with hateful comments and private messages, calling me a monster, a psychopath, and even threatening me with violence. David called, urging me to stay offline and not engage. He wanted to handle it legally, but I refused to be silent. They had trampled on my dignity for the last time. I would not hide. I opened my laptop and wrote my own public post. It was calm, factual, and professional. I confirmed I was the woman in the story, but I systematically dismantled their lies. I attached the official, stamped forensic medical report detailing my broken ribs. I attached screenshots of bank transfers, proving I had lent Brenda thousands of dollars she never repaid, shattering their gold digger narrative. And then I played my trump card. I uploaded the entire, unedited video from the living room camera. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The public saw the truth. Brenda's relentless verbal assault, my quiet endurance, and the shocking, brutal violence of Michael's attack. The raw audio of the impact was sickeningly clear. Public opinion didn't just shift. It reversed with the force of a tidal wave. The internet mob, realizing they had been manipulated, turned their fury on Michael's family. The cousin deleted her post and her account, but it was too late. The story was picked up by local news outlets. My boss called again. Michael's employer, a major corporation with a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior, had seen the video. He had been fired. My decisive counterattack had obliterated their lies and cost them everything. Almost a month had passed since I'd left. My ribs were healing, and a sense of calm had settled over me. Michael's trial date was set. He was out on bail, a bail his father had scraped together every last penny to post. One afternoon, I was at a large grocery store when I felt someone staring at me. It was Michael. He was almost unrecognizable. His hair was greasy and unkempt, his face was gaunt and covered in patchy stubble, and his clothes were wrinkled and hung loosely on his shrunken frame. The arrogant man I knew was gone, replaced by a pathetic, broken shell of a person. The loss of his job, the social ostracization, and the looming threat of prison had destroyed him. He rushed toward me, his voice hoarse as he begged. "Sarah, please," he whimpered, telling me how he'd lost everything, his job, his friends, his reputation. He offered me everything, the full $12,000 in savings, a clean break with no asset disputes, if I would just drop the charges. "If I go to prison," he cried, "my life is over." I looked at him not with pity or even satisfaction, but with utter contempt. "Michael," I said, my voice steady and cold, "that money was always mine. You can't bargain with something you don't own. Your life isn't over because of me. It's over because of your own violence, your own weakness, and the toxic way you were raised. The only place I will see you again is in court next Wednesday." I pushed my cart past him, leaving him standing there in the aisle, completely and utterly defeated. On the day of the trial, I walked into the county courthouse, poised and confident in a black business suit. On the other side of the courtroom, Michael's family was a picture of ruin. Richard, frail and coughing, Brenda, hiding her face in a scarf, and Michael, trembling before the judge. His lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but David methodically presented the evidence. The long history of abuse, the medical reports, and the damning video, emphasizing that Michael attacked me knowing I was pregnant. After deliberation, the judge returned. His voice was stern as he condemned Michael's cowardly and brutal actions. Michael was sentenced to 6 months in jail. The judge's gavel struck the woodblock with a sharp crack, finalizing the verdict and our divorce. Brenda fainted. Richard slumped over his cane. As the bailiffs handcuffed Michael and led him away, he looked back at me one last time, his eyes filled with a regret that had come far, far too late. A few days later, I returned to the condo with a police escort to enforce the court order. Brenda and Richard were packing their last bags. They didn't say a word, their faces a mixture of shame and defeat. As I closed the door behind them, I stood alone in the quiet living room. The space was filled with too many painful memories. I couldn't stay here. I called a realtor friend and told her to sell it. At the same time, a new door opened. My company, impressed with my resilience and professionalism throughout the ordeal, offered me a promotion to a project manager position. The catch? It required a transfer to our branch in Los Angeles, with a significant salary increase. Without a moment's hesitation, I accepted. On the day of my departure from O'Hare International Airport, I wore a bright yellow floral dress. My parents and a few close friends were there to see me off. My mother hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes, while my father beamed with pride. "That's my girl," he said, "never backs down." As the plane climbed into the sky, I looked down at the sprawling city of Chicago, disappearing below. That city had been the site of my deepest pain, but it had also forged me into the strong, unbreakable woman I was today. I leaned my head back against the seat, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I smiled a genuine, radiant smile of pure peace. The bright sun streamed through the window, warming my face. A new journey, a life of freedom, dignity, and brilliant light was waiting for me, and I was ready.